Bullies started mocking the new girl and tried to slap her cheeks. Big mistake. She got furious and beat them up. The rain drummed against the passenger window of the silver Honda Civic as Sophia Chen pressed her forehead to the cool glass, watching the unfamiliar streets of her new city blur past. The windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm that matched her anxiety as they approached Riverside Academy for the first time. At 16, she had become an expert at reading the architecture of new schools, new neighborhoods, new beginnings that never quite felt like home. "It's going to be different this time, sweetheart," her mother, Dr. Elena Chen, said from the driver's seat, her accent carrying traces of both her Israeli heritage and the years they'd spent moving from country to country. "The consulting contract is for 3 years minimum. You'll get to graduate from the same school you started at." Sophia nodded without taking her eyes off the window. She'd heard variations of this promise before, in Singapore, in Brussels, in Toronto. Her mother's expertise in international cybersecurity consulting was in high demand, but it came at the cost of stability for her daughter. Each move had been temporary, each school a way station rather than a destination. "I know, Mom," Sophia replied softly. "It's just, you know how it is." Elena glanced at her daughter in the rearview mirror, noting the tense set of her shoulders, the way she unconsciously shifted into a defensive posture even while sitting. "Remember what we've practiced. You are strong, you are capable, and you have nothing to prove to anyone. Except how to fit in without standing out," Sophia muttered. "That's not strength, Sophia. That's survival. There's a difference." As they pulled into the visitor parking lot of Riverside Academy, Sophia took in the imposing glass and steel structure that would be her academic home for the next 2 years. The building was modern and expensive looking, with large windows that reflected the grey October sky and carefully manicured landscaping that spoke of well-funded district budgets. Students moved across the campus in clusters, their body language already telling her everything she needed to know about the social hierarchies within. The main office smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and copy machine toner. Mrs. Patterson, the secretary, was a cheerful woman in her 50s who handed Sophia a thick packet of orientation materials and a schedule printed on cream-colored paper. "You're in luck, dear," Mrs. Patterson said with a smile that seemed genuine. "We're assigning you a buddy for your first week. Zoe Martinez is one of our best students, and she'll help you navigate everything." Sophia accepted the papers and managed a polite thank you, though the idea of being assigned a buddy made her stomach tighten with embarrassment. At her last school, the assigned buddy had lasted exactly 1 day before deciding that helping the weird new girl wasn't worth the social risk. Elena squeezed her daughter's shoulder. "I'll pick you up at 3:30. Remember, you can handle anything that comes your way." Alone in the hallway with her class schedule and a crude map of the school, Sophia took a deep breath and began to navigate toward her first period English class. The hallways of Riverside Academy were wide and bright, with motivational posters about achievement and college preparation covering the walls between lockers. Students moved with the casual confidence of people who belonged, who had friend groups and established routines and inside jokes that stretched back years. Sophia kept her head down and tried to move invisibly through the crowds, a skill she had perfected over years of being the outsider. At 5 feet 3 inches, with a slight frame, straight black hair that she kept in a practical ponytail, and wire-rimmed glasses that she frequently pushed up her nose when nervous, she didn't exactly command attention. Her clothes were simple and unassuming. Dark jeans, a plain grey sweater, and comfortable sneakers suitable for quick movement if necessary. What none of her new classmates could see was the lean muscle definition hidden beneath her modest clothing, the calluses on her knuckles from years of striking heavy bags, or the way she unconsciously catalogued exits and potential threats in every new environment. Sophia had been training in Krav Maga since she was 8 years old, starting when her mother noticed her tendency to shrink away from conflict and decided that her daughter needed to know she could protect herself. "A woman who knows she can fight never has to," Elena had told her during their first lesson in a converted garage gym in Tel Aviv, where they'd lived for 6 months when Sophia was 10. But she also never has to be afraid. 8 years of intensive training under various instructors across different countries had transformed Sophia into something her quiet exterior never advertised. She held black belts in both Krav Maga and karate, had trained in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, boxing and kickboxing, and could disable opponents twice her size with techniques designed for real-world self-defense rather than sport competition. Her reflexes were sharp enough to catch falling objects without thinking, her spatial awareness keen enough to navigate crowded spaces without collision, and her understanding of leverage and anatomy precise enough to end conflicts quickly and efficiently. But Sophia had also learned, sometimes through painful experience, that her fighting skills were meant to be invisible. The one time she had let her abilities show at Lincoln High in Toronto when Derek Morrison had cornered her in an empty classroom and tried to force himself on her, the aftermath had been complicated. Derek had spent 2 days in the hospital with a dislocated shoulder and bruised ribs, and while the school administration had eventually ruled in her favor after reviewing security footage, the social fallout had been severe. She'd been labeled as dangerous, unstable, someone to avoid rather than befriend. "Self-defense is for self-defense," her mother had reminded her afterward, "not for solving social problems. The goal is always to de-escalate, to escape, to avoid confrontation entirely. Fighting is what happens when all other options are exhausted." So Sophia had learned to be invisible, to avoid situations where her training might become necessary, to endure harassment and bullying with the stoic patience of someone who knew she could end it but chose not to. It was a lonely way to live, but it had kept her out of serious trouble through 3 different high schools in 4 years. Her first period English teacher, Mr. Richardson, was a tall man with prematurely grey hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses similar to her own. He introduced her to the class with minimal fuss, and Sophia was grateful when he simply pointed to an empty desk in the 3rd row rather than asking her to stand and share anything about herself. "We're currently reading To Kill a Mockingbird," he explained quietly as he handed her a worn paperback copy. "We're about halfway through, but the themes should be familiar enough for you to catch up quickly." Sophia nodded and opened the book, immediately recognizing the irony. Stories about standing up to bullies and fighting injustice seemed to follow her from school to school, as if the universe was trying to tell her something she wasn't ready to hear. The morning passed without incident. Sophia attended her classes, took careful notes, and spoke only when directly addressed by teachers. She ate lunch alone in the library, a strategy that had served her well at previous schools, and used the time to study the social dynamics of Riverside Academy through careful observation. The hierarchy was typical of most American high schools: athletes and traditionally attractive students at the top, followed by various subgroups based on interests, achievements, and social connections. At the bottom were the outcasts, the different ones, the students who didn't fit neatly into any category. Sophia had learned to identify where she would likely land in these systems, and Riverside Academy seemed no different from the others. What did concern her was the group of students who seemed to move through the school with an aura of untouchability. Even from across the library, she could see how other students reacted to them, stepping aside in hallways, avoiding eye contact, conversations stopping when they approached. It was the kind of social power that often came with a predatory edge, and Sophia made a mental note to study their patterns and avoid their territory. It was during her transition between 4th and 5th period that she first encountered the group directly. Sophia was hurrying toward her advanced chemistry class, arms full of textbooks and trying to navigate the crowd of students moving between classes, when she rounded a corner and nearly collided with a tall boy with perfectly styled blonde hair and expensive sneakers. "Whoa there," he said, looking her up and down with calculating blue eyes. "You must be the new girl." Sophia felt her muscles tense involuntarily, the way they always did when she sensed potential trouble. The boy's posture was casual, but there was something in his expression that reminded her of the way predators studied prey before deciding whether to attack. "Sorry," she said quietly, stepping to the side to continue past him. "I'm Marcus Romano," he continued, blocking her path with what looked like a friendly smile. "Welcome to Riverside Academy." Two other boys flanked Marcus, clearly part of his inner circle. One was tall and athletic with dark hair and the broad shoulders of someone who spent serious time in the weight room. The other was wiry, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to take in everything around him with uncomfortable intensity. "Jake Sullivan," the athlete introduced himself, his voice carrying the easy confidence of someone accustomed to being important. "I play varsity basketball." "Connor Blake," the wiry boy added, though he didn't offer any additional information about himself. His gaze lingered on Sophia in a way that made her skin crawl. "Sophia Chen," she responded, because ignoring them would likely create more problems than engaging politely. "I should get to class." "What's the rush?" Marcus asked, his tone still friendly, but with an underlying edge that suggested this wasn't really a question. "Where are you from?" "What brings the Chen family to our little corner of paradise?" Sophia recognized the interrogation for what it was, a process of categorization, of determining where she fit in their world and whether she posed any threat to their position. She'd been through this before. "My mom got a consulting contract here," she said simply. "We move around a lot for her work." "Consulting," Marcus repeated thoughtfully. "What kind of consulting?" "Cybersecurity." Jake laughed. "So your mom's like a computer nerd?" Sophia felt a familiar flash of irritation at the dismissive tone, but kept her expression neutral. "She's an expert in international cybersecurity threat assessment and prevention. She works with government agencies and major corporations to protect sensitive data." The description was accurate but deliberately technical, designed to sound impressive enough to discourage further questions. It usually worked. "Sounds boring," Connor said with a smirk. "What about you?" "Any special talents? Hobbies? Interests?" The question felt like a probe, searching for weaknesses or points of leverage. Sophia had learned to deflect these inquiries with vague, unremarkable answers. "I read a lot," she said. "Study, the usual." "The usual," Marcus repeated, exchanging glances with his friends. How refreshingly modest. "Well, Sophia Chen, if you ever want to branch out from the usual, you know where to find us." They moved away with the casual arrogance of people who owned their environment, leaving Sophia standing in the hallway with her heart rate slightly elevated and a growing certainty that her hopes for an uneventful semester had just taken a significant hit. The rest of the day passed without further incident, but Sophia found herself hyper-aware of the trio's presence throughout the school. She noticed how other students reacted to them, the subtle shifts in posture, the way conversations changed when they passed, the careful distance maintained by anyone who wasn't part of their circle. It was the kind of behavioral pattern that suggested a reputation built on intimidation and consequence. When 3:30 arrived, Sophia was more than ready to leave Riverside Academy behind for the day. She found her mother waiting in the pickup line, classical music playing softly from the car speakers and a thermos of tea steaming in the cup holder. "How was your first day?" Elena asked as Sophia settled into the passenger seat. "Fine," Sophia replied automatically, then reconsidered. Her mother had always been able to detect evasion, and honest communication was one of the foundations of their relationship. Actually, I think I might have attracted some unwanted attention. Elena's expression sharpened slightly. What kind of attention? Sophia described her encounter with Marcus, Jake, and Connor, carefully observing her mother's reaction. Elena listened without interruption, her hands steady on the steering wheel, but her jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Classic predatory behavior, Elena said when Sophia finished. They're testing you, trying to determine your threat level and potential value as a target. That's what I thought too. And what's your assessment? Sophia considered the question seriously. Her mother had taught her to analyze potential threats the same way she analyzed cybersecurity vulnerabilities, systematically, objectively, with multiple contingency plans. Marcus is the leader, but he's also the most calculating. He won't move against me unless he's confident of the outcome and the consequences. Jake is the muscle, probably used to using intimidation and physical presence to get what he wants. He'll be the most likely to escalate to actual violence. Connor is the wild card. He seems to enjoy psychological manipulation and might be willing to take risks the others wouldn't. Elena nodded approvingly. Good analysis. Strategy. Avoidance for as long as possible. Stay out of their territory. Don't give them opportunities for confrontation. Maintain low visibility. And if avoidance fails... Sophia was quiet for a moment, staring out the window at the suburban houses passing by. De-escalation first. Escape if possible. Only fight if absolutely necessary for self-defense. Correct. Elena reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. You know what you're capable of, Sophia. But more importantly, you know when and why to use those capabilities. Trust your instincts. That evening, Sophia found herself in the basement of their rented house, which her mother had already converted into a makeshift training space. Hanging heavy bags, floor mats, and various training equipment had followed them from city to city, creating familiar environments where Sophia could work through stress and maintain her skills. She changed into workout clothes, a sports bra and athletic shorts that revealed the lean muscle definition she kept hidden under school-appropriate clothing. Her arms showed the subtle bulk of someone who regularly trained with weights. Her legs, the definition of countless hours spent practicing kicks and footwork. Scars from years of sparring marked her shins and forearms, small badges of dedication to her craft. Sophia began with her usual warm-up routine, stretching and light movement to prepare her body for more intensive training. As she moved through familiar forms and combinations, her mind processed the events of the day and the challenges that likely lay ahead. The truth was that she was tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of making herself small to avoid conflict. At her last school in Toronto, she had endured 3 months of escalating harassment before Derek Morrison's attack had forced her to defend herself. The psychological toll of constant vigilance and suppressed anger had been significant, and she'd hoped that Riverside Academy might be different. But as she drove her fists into the heavy bag with precise, powerful strikes, Sophia admitted to herself that her hope had been naive. Bullies existed in every school, every social system, every environment where power could be accumulated and wielded against those perceived as vulnerable. The only variable was how long she could avoid becoming a target and what she would do when avoidance was no longer possible. Your form is getting sloppy, Elena observed from the basement stairs. She had changed into her own training clothes and carried a pair of focus mitts. I was thinking, Sophia replied, accepting the interruption gratefully. Think later. Train now. Elena held up the mitts. Show me the combination we worked on last week. For the next hour, mother and daughter moved through complex training drills that combined striking, grappling, and defensive techniques. Elena had been a combat instructor in the Israeli Defense Forces before transitioning to cybersecurity consulting, and her teaching methods reflected both martial discipline and real-world application. Remember, Elena said as they worked through scenarios involving multiple attackers. The goal is never to prove how tough you are. The goal is to survive, to protect yourself, and to get away safely. Your ego is not worth your safety. I know, Sophia replied, breathing hard as she executed a combination that would disable an attacker's ability to pursue her. Do you? Because I see anger in your technique tonight. Anger leads to poor decision-making, unnecessary risks, and escalation beyond what's required for self-defense. Sophia paused, lowering her hands. What if I'm tired of being the one who has to avoid conflict? What if I'm tired of making myself invisible so other people can feel powerful? Elena studied her daughter carefully. Those are valid feelings, Sophia, but they're also dangerous ones. The moment you start fighting to make a point rather than to protect yourself is the moment you become the aggressor. And what if protecting myself requires making a point? Then you make the point as efficiently and safely as possible, and then you walk away. Elena set down the mitts. Show me the disarm technique for grabbing from behind. They continued training until nearly 9 o'clock, working through scenarios and techniques until Sophia's frustration had been channeled into focused preparation. By the time they finished, she felt calmer, more centered, and better equipped to handle whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. As she showered and prepared for bed, Sophia reflected on the conversation with her mother. The truth was that she didn't want to fight, didn't want to hurt anyone, didn't want to be known as the dangerous girl who had to be feared rather than befriended. But she also didn't want to spend the next 2 years as a victim, constantly looking over her shoulder and making herself smaller to accommodate bullies. The question was whether there was a middle path, a way to be herself without provoking conflict, a way to be strong without being threatening, a way to belong without compromising her principles or her safety. As she drifted off to sleep, Sophia hoped that tomorrow would bring answers rather than escalation. But deep down, she suspected that hope was about to be tested in ways she wasn't quite prepared for. The second day at Riverside Academy began with a small but telling incident. Sophia arrived at her locker to find a piece of paper taped to the door with "New Girl" written in block letters. It wasn't malicious exactly, but it wasn't friendly either. More like marking territory, letting her know she was being watched. She removed the paper without reaction, aware that several students nearby were observing her response. In her peripheral vision, she caught sight of Connor Blake leaning against a locker 20 feet away, his sharp features wearing an expression of mild amusement. "Zoe Martinez," a voice said behind her. Sophia turned to see a girl about her own age with warm brown eyes and curly dark hair pulled back in a colorful headband. "I'm supposed to be your buddy this week, but I'm running a little behind schedule." "Sophia Chen," she replied, grateful for what seemed like genuine friendliness. "And no problem. I've been managing okay on my own." "I heard." Zoe's expression grew more serious. "Listen, can I give you some advice? Unsolicited and possibly unwelcome advice." Sophia nodded, curious about what this girl had observed in less than 24 hours. Marcus Romano and his friends, they're not just regular jerks. They're systematic about it. They pick someone new every semester, usually someone who looks like they won't fight back, and they make that person's life miserable until they transfer or break down or become completely invisible. "What's their method?" Sophia asked, surprised by her own directness. Zoe glanced around to make sure they weren't overheard. "It starts small. Little things like that note, casual bumping in hallways making you drop your books. Then it escalates to public humiliation, social isolation, sometimes worse. Last year, they targeted a sophomore named David Kim. Kid was brilliant, planned to be valedictorian, had early admission to MIT locked up. What happened? By Christmas, he was having panic attacks in class. By spring break, his parents moved him to a private school across town. MIT withdrew their early admission offer. Zoe's expression hardened. These guys don't just want to be popular, they want to be powerful, and power requires victims. Sophia absorbed this information, fitting it into her mental assessment of the threat level she was facing. Why are you telling me this? Because you seem different. Most new students either try to befriend them immediately, or they're obviously scared. You just looked prepared. Zoe studied Sophia's face. Are you prepared? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that Sophia wasn't sure she was ready to explore. I'm prepared to take care of myself, she said finally. Good, Zoe replied, because I don't think they're done testing you yet. The warning proved prophetic. Throughout the morning, Sophia noticed small escalations in the attention she was receiving from Marcus's group. Jake Sullivan appeared in her path between classes, forcing her to step aside as he passed. Connor Blake made comments just loud enough for her to hear, observations about her clothes, her hair, her habit of keeping her head down. During lunch, which she again ate alone in the library, Sophia researched the school's disciplinary policies and anti-bullying procedures. What she found was typical of most institutions: lots of official language about zero tolerance and comprehensive reporting systems, but little practical protection for students who found themselves targeted by subtle, systematic harassment. The real test came during her sixth period study hall. The supervising teacher, Mr. Peterson, was elderly and hearing impaired, making the large classroom an ideal environment for students to engage in social dynamics without adult interference. Sophia had chosen a seat in the back corner, hoping to use the time to catch up on reading for her English class. She was deeply absorbed in To Kill a Mockingbird when a shadow fell across her desk. Looking up, she found Marcus Romano standing beside her table, his expression casual but his presence clearly intentional. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, already pulling out the chair across from her. "Actually, I'm trying to study," Sophia replied, politely but firmly. "So am I," Marcus said, sitting down anyway. "I'm studying you." The directness of the statement caught Sophia off guard. She set down her book and looked at him fully for the first time, taking in the expensive designer clothing, the carefully styled hair, the confident posture of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. "What exactly do you want to know?" she asked. "Everything," Marcus replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Where you've been, what you're running from, what makes you think you can just show up here and ignore the social structure that the rest of us have to live with." "I'm not ignoring anything. I'm just trying to get through high school without drama." Without drama. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her. "That's interesting because, in my experience, people who try hardest to avoid drama are usually the ones carrying the most of it." Sophia felt her patience beginning to fray. "Is there a point to this conversation?" "The point is integration, Sophia. This is a community, and communities have rules, hierarchies, ways of doing things that keep everything running smoothly. And what's my place in this hierarchy?" Marcus's smile widened. "That's what we're trying to figure out. See, most new students fall into predictable categories. The eager-to-please types who try to befriend everyone immediately. The obviously intimidated ones who stay so far under the radar they might as well be invisible. The wannabe rebels who think they can come in and change everything. Which category do you think I'm in?" "None of them," Marcus admitted. "You're something different. You're not trying to impress anyone, but you're not hiding either. You're not scared, but you're not aggressive. You're careful, watchful, like you're waiting for something." Sophia realized that Marcus was more perceptive than she had given him credit for. His analysis was uncomfortably accurate, and she began to understand why he had maintained his position at the top of the school's social hierarchy. "Maybe I'm just trying to figure out how things work here before I decide how to fit in," she said. "Or maybe you're trying to figure out whether you want to fit in at all." The observation hit closer to home than Sophia was comfortable with. She gathered her books and stood to leave. "Where are you going?" Marcus asked, his tone still conversational, but with an edge of command that suggested he wasn't accustomed to people walking away from him. "To find somewhere quieter to study." "Sit down, Sophia." The words were quiet, but carried the unmistakable weight of someone used to being obeyed. Around them, other students had begun to notice the interaction, and Sophia could feel attention focusing on her response. This was the moment she had been dreading since her first day, the point where polite avoidance was no longer an option, where she would have to choose between submission and confrontation. "No," she said simply, and continued gathering her things. Marcus stood as well, his movement quick enough to put him between Sophia and the exit. "I don't think you understand how things work here." "I understand perfectly," Sophia replied, her voice calm despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her system. "You want me to be afraid of you. You want me to acknowledge your authority and accept whatever position you decide to assign me in your social hierarchy. And I'm not interested." The classroom had grown noticeably quieter, with most students now openly watching the confrontation. Mr. Peterson remained oblivious at his desk, grading papers with the help of a magnifying glass. Marcus stepped closer, using his height advantage to loom over Sophia in a classic intimidation tactic. "You should be interested. You should be very interested in staying on my good side." Sophia felt her body automatically shift into a more balanced stance, her weight settling over her feet in preparation for sudden movement. The change was subtle but significant, the difference between a potential victim and someone prepared to defend herself. "Are you threatening me?" she asked, keeping her voice level. "I'm educating you," Marcus replied, "about reality, about consequences, about what happens to people who think they're special. And what happens to people who think they can intimidate everyone around them?" Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Why don't you ask David Kim?" The reference to Zoe's story about the transfer student was clearly intended to frighten her, but it had the opposite effect. Sophia felt her anger crystallizing into something cold and focused. "I think this conversation is over," she said, moving to step around him. Marcus grabbed her wrist, his grip firm but not quite hard enough to cause pain. "No, it's not." The physical contact crossed a line that transformed the situation from verbal confrontation to potential assault. Sophia's training kicked in automatically, her free hand moving to break Marcus's grip, using a technique that would cause significant pain without permanent damage. But before she could complete the movement, Connor Blake appeared beside their table, his arrival coinciding with Mr. Peterson looking up from his papers. "Everything okay over here?" Connor asked loudly enough for the teacher to hear. "Just getting acquainted," Marcus replied smoothly, releasing Sophia's wrist as if the gesture had been entirely casual. "Sophia was just telling me about her previous schools." Mr. Peterson squinted in their direction. "Keep it down, please. This is supposed to be study hall." "Of course, Mr. Peterson," Marcus said with exaggerated politeness. "We'll be quieter." Sophia realized that the intervention had been carefully orchestrated. Connor had prevented her from defending herself while providing Marcus with plausible deniability for his actions. They had done this before, had refined their methods to operate within the boundaries of what teachers would notice or care about. She gathered her remaining books and moved toward the exit, hyper-aware of the eyes following her and the whispered conversations that began as soon as she was out of earshot. In the hallway, Zoe Martinez was waiting by the water fountain, her expression grim. "I saw Connor heading for the classroom," she said. "How bad was it?" Sophia described the encounter, noting how Zoe's expression grew increasingly troubled. "They're accelerating their timeline," Zoe observed. "Usually they spend a few weeks on the preliminary testing before moving to direct confrontation." "Why?" Because you're not reacting the way they expect. Most targets either submit immediately or escalate to obvious defiance. You're doing neither, and that makes you unpredictable. Sophia considered this assessment. What would you do? Honestly, I'd probably find a way to transfer to a different school. Zoe looked embarrassed by her own admission. I know that sounds cowardly, but these guys have serious influence here. Marcus's father is a major donor to the school district. Jake's mother is on the school board. Connor's family has connections throughout the local political structure. So they're essentially untouchable. Not untouchable, but definitely protected. The administration won't act against them unless they do something completely undeniable and public. Sophia nodded, filing this information away. Thanks for the warning. There's something else, Zoe said hesitantly. I heard them talking after the incident yesterday. They're planning something for Friday. What kind of something? I don't know specifics, but Jake mentioned the North Corridor after school. That's usually where they... Zoe trailed off. Where they... What? Where they make their point. When they want to send a message to someone, they corner them there after classes when the halls are mostly empty. No witnesses, no teachers, no consequences. Sophia felt a chill of recognition. The isolated confrontation was a classic predator tactic. Create a situation where the target was alone, outnumbered, and had no obvious recourse for help. Has anyone ever fought back? Zoe shook her head. David Kim tried to run, but they caught him. Emma Rodriguez just took whatever they dished out and hoped it would be over quickly. Tommy Chen, no relation to you, actually tried to tell a teacher, but they made his life so miserable afterward that he ended up homeschooled. The pattern was clear. Resistance was futile, authority figures were ineffective, and the only options were submission or escape. It was a carefully constructed system designed to maintain power through psychological dominance rather than obvious violence. But as Sophia walked to her final class of the day, she found herself thinking about a conversation she'd had with her Krav Maga instructor in Brussels, a former Special Forces operator named Henri, who had survived combat in 3 different conflicts. The predator mindset, Henri had explained during a lesson on situational awareness, depends on the assumption that the prey will behave predictably. They choose targets who they believe will react with fear, submission, or ineffective resistance. But when prey responds with unexpected competence and controlled aggression, predators often retreat. They want easy victories, not actual fights. The question was whether Henri's analysis applied to high school bullies, or whether Marcus, Jake, and Connor were too invested in their reputations to back down from a confrontation, even if it escalated beyond their comfort zone. By the time Sophia reached her last class, she had made a decision. She wouldn't seek out conflict, wouldn't provoke a confrontation, but she also wouldn't continue to live as a potential victim. If Friday brought the showdown that Zoe had warned about, Sophia would be ready to defend herself with whatever level of force the situation required. The realization brought both relief and apprehension. Relief because she was tired of feeling hunted, tired of constantly modifying her behavior to avoid predators, tired of making herself smaller to accommodate bullies. Apprehension because she knew that once she crossed the line from avoidance to confrontation, there would be no going back to invisibility. That evening, Sophia told her mother about the escalating situation, describing both the study hall confrontation and Zoe's warning about Friday's planned incident. Elena listened without interruption, her expression growing progressively more serious. When Sophia finished, her mother was quiet for several minutes, staring out the kitchen window at their temporary backyard. "What do you think I should do?" Sophia asked finally. "I think," Elena said slowly, "that you already know what you're going to do. The question is whether you're prepared for the consequences." "What consequences?" "Fighting back changes everything, Sophia. Even when it's justified, even when it's necessary, even when it's successful, you become a different person in other people's eyes. Some will respect you, some will fear you, some will see you as a threat to be eliminated. Sophia nodded. But the alternative is living as a victim. The alternative is many things, including transferring schools, involving law enforcement, or accepting that sometimes strategic retreat is the better choice. Do you think I should retreat? Elena turned from the window to look directly at her daughter. I think you should make whatever choice allows you to sleep at night and look at yourself in the mirror with respect. But I also think you should be very clear about why you're making that choice. What do you mean? Are you considering fighting back because it's necessary for your safety, or because you're angry and tired of being pushed around? Sophia considered the question carefully. Both, I think, but mostly because I don't want to spend the next 2 years afraid. Then you need to be smarter than they are, more prepared than they expect, and more controlled than they can provoke you into being. Elena moved to the cabinet where they kept their first aid supplies. And you need to understand that even if you win the fight, you might lose the war. That night, Sophia spent 2 hours in the basement training with unusual intensity. She practiced the specific techniques that would be most effective against multiple attackers in a confined space, focusing on movements that would disable rather than merely hurt, that would end a confrontation quickly rather than prolonging it. As she worked through scenarios and combinations, Sophia tried to imagine exactly how Friday's confrontation might unfold. Would Marcus try intimidation first, giving her a chance to de-escalate? Would they attempt to corner her physically, leaving her no choice but to fight? Would they underestimate her abilities enough to give her a tactical advantage? The truth was that she hoped they would reconsider, would decide that whatever point they wanted to make wasn't worth the risk of actual confrontation. But she also knew that hope was probably naive. Marcus, Jake, and Connor had built their reputations on dominance, and backing down from a challenge would undermine everything they had worked to establish. By Thursday evening, the tension at Riverside Academy was thick enough to cut with a knife. Word had spread through the social networks that something was going to happen between Marcus's group and the new girl, and students were choosing sides, or at least positioning themselves to witness whatever occurred. Sophia found herself the object of intense scrutiny throughout the day. Some students looked at her with pity, assuming she was about to become another casualty of the school's power structure. Others watched with curiosity, wondering if she might somehow be different from the previous targets. A few, including Zoe and several other girls, approached her with offers of support or advice. The guidance counselor, Mrs. Williams, even called her in for a checkup conversation about how she was adjusting to the new school. "Is there anything you'd like to talk about?" Mrs. Williams asked, her expression suggesting she had heard rumors about the building tension. "Any concerns about your social integration or interactions with other students?" Sophia recognized the invitation to report the harassment, but she also understood that involving adults at this point would likely escalate the situation without actually resolving it. Marcus and his friends were too sophisticated to leave evidence of their actions, and any official intervention would probably just make them more creative in their methods. "I'm doing fine," she told the counselor, "still adjusting, but that's normal." "Well, remember that my door is always open if you need to talk about anything. Sometimes social dynamics can be challenging for new students." The euphemism was clear, and Sophia appreciated the counselor's attempt to help, even though she had already decided to handle the situation herself. Friday arrived with an unseasonable warmth that felt more like summer than October. Sophia dressed carefully, choosing clothes that would allow for freedom of movement while still appearing normal to casual observers. She wore her hair in a secure ponytail, removed any jewelry that could be grabbed or used against her, and made sure her sneakers were properly tied. Throughout the day, she was hyper-aware of Marcus, Jake, and Connor's positions relative to her own. They seemed relaxed, confident, going through their normal routines without any apparent concern about the afternoon's planned confrontation. Their casual attitude suggested they had done this before and expected it to follow a predictable pattern. During lunch, Zoe sat with Sophia and several other girls who had formed an informal support network. "You could still call in sick for the afternoon," offered Sarah Kim, David's younger sister, "or find a reason to stay after in a teacher's classroom. Or we could all walk out together," suggested another girl named Maria. Safety in numbers. Sophia appreciated their concern, but she had already committed to seeing this through. "I'll be fine," she assured them. "But thank you." "What are you going to do?" Zoe asked quietly. "Whatever I have to do." The afternoon classes passed with agonizing slowness. Sophia found it difficult to concentrate on lectures or assignments, her mind instead running through tactical scenarios and potential outcomes. By the time the final bell rang, her heart rate had elevated to pre-competition levels, and she could feel the familiar surge of adrenaline that preceded any serious confrontation. Students began streaming out of classrooms and toward the exits, eager to begin their weekend plans. Sophia deliberately moved slowly, allowing the majority of the crowd to clear out before she made her way toward the north corridor where her locker was located. The hallways emptied quickly on Friday afternoons, with most students departing as soon as possible. Teachers gathered their materials and headed home, custodial staff began their cleaning routines, and the building settled into the quiet that would last until Monday morning. Sophia reached her locker and began gathering the books she would need for weekend homework, hyper-aware of every sound in the corridor. She could hear distant voices from the main exit, the squeak of a janitor's cart from the east wing, and the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. When she heard footsteps approaching from behind, she wasn't surprised. "Well, look who decided to stick around," Marcus Romano's voice echoed off the empty hallway walls. Sophia turned slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. Marcus was approaching with Jake and Connor flanking him, their formation designed to prevent easy escape. They moved with the casual confidence of predators who had cornered their prey. "Going somewhere special this weekend?" Marcus asked conversationally as they closed the distance. "Home," Sophia replied simply, continuing to organize her backpack. "That's nice. Family time is important." Marcus stopped about 6 feet away, close enough to dominate the space, but not yet close enough for physical contact. "Of course, family can be complicated, especially when you're always moving around, never really putting down roots." Sophia recognized the psychological probing, the attempt to find emotional vulnerabilities that could be exploited. "Is there something you wanted to discuss?" "Actually, yes." Marcus's tone shifted slightly, becoming more serious. "I wanted to talk about respect, about understanding your place in the social order, about learning to recognize when you're outmatched." "I see." Sophia zipped up her backpack and turned to face them fully. "And what exactly am I supposed to be recognizing?" Jake stepped forward, his athletic build and aggressive posture clearly intended to be intimidating. "You're supposed to recognize that you don't get to just show up here and act like you're better than everyone else. I've never acted like I'm better than anyone." "Bullshit," Connor said with venom in his voice. "You walk around here like you think you're special, like the rules don't apply to you, like you can just ignore the people who matter." Sophia felt her patience finally reaching its limit. "The only thing I've ignored is your desperate need for attention and validation. I'm sorry if my lack of interest in your little power games has bruised your egos." Marcus's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Careful, Sophia. You're about to say something you'll regret." What I regret is wasting 3 weeks trying to avoid this conversation instead of having it immediately. Sophia adjusted her stance slightly, her weight settling over her feet in preparation for sudden movement. So, let's be clear about what's really happening here. What's happening, Jake said, moving closer, is that you're about to learn some manners. What's happening, Sophia corrected, is that 3 insecure teenagers are trying to make themselves feel powerful by intimidating someone they perceive as vulnerable. What's happening is that you've built your entire social identity around being feared rather than respected. What's happening is that you're about to discover you've miscalculated badly. Connor laughed, but there was an edge of uncertainty in the sound. Big words from someone who's about to get her ass kicked. By whom? Sophia asked calmly. You. The question hung in the air with unexpected weight. Connor was wiry and quick, but he relied on psychological intimidation rather than physical confrontation. Jake was clearly the muscle of the group, but his size and strength were products of weight training rather than combat experience. Marcus was the strategist, the one who planned and manipulated, but he was also the least likely to actually engage in violence himself. All of us, Marcus said finally, if that's what it takes. Sophia nodded slowly, recognizing that negotiation was no longer possible. Okay, but understand that if you touch me, if any of you try to hurt me or intimidate me physically, I will defend myself with whatever force is necessary to stop you. Right, Jake scoffed, like you could do anything to... He didn't finish the sentence because Sophia was already moving. 8 years of training had taught her that in a multiple attacker scenario, the key was to act first, move fast, and eliminate threats in order of immediate danger. Jake was the closest and the most physically capable, so he was the primary target. Sophia closed the distance between them in 2 quick steps, her movement so sudden that he didn't have time to react defensively. She ducked under his surprised grab attempt and drove her elbow into his solar plexus with controlled precision, causing him to double over as the air rushed from his lungs. Before Jake could recover, Sophia grabbed his wrist and used his own forward momentum to execute a perfect hip throw that sent him crashing into lockers with a resounding clang that echoed through the empty corridor. Connor was already moving toward her, his face twisted with anger and shock, but Sophia was ready for him. She sidestepped his wild swing and caught his extended arm in a submission hold that would dislocate his shoulder if he continued to struggle. Don't move, she said calmly, applying just enough pressure to make her point clear. Marcus had frozen in place, his eyes wide with disbelief as he processed what had just happened. In less than 10 seconds, his 2 closest allies had been neutralized by someone he had dismissed as an easy target. This is impossible, he said almost to himself. Sophia released Connor, who immediately backed away while cradling his arm. Jake was still on the ground, gasping for breath and looking stunned. Nothing impossible about it, Sophia replied, her breathing still even and controlled. You just made incorrect assumptions about who you were dealing with. Marcus looked around wildly, as if searching for some way to regain control of the situation. You can't. Can't what? Defend myself when 3 people corner me in an empty hallway. Can't refuse to be your victim. Can't demonstrate that your little reign of terror depends entirely on targeting people who won't fight back? You'll regret this, Marcus said, but the threat sounded hollow even to his own ears. Will I? Sophia adjusted her backpack and prepared to leave. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like the only people with regrets are the ones lying on the floor. She walked past Marcus toward the exit, pausing only when she reached the end of the corridor. For what it's worth, she said without turning around, I never wanted this to happen. All I wanted was to get through high school without drama, but if you or your friends ever try to intimidate, threaten, or touch me again, what happened today will seem gentle by comparison. Sophia left the building and walked to where her mother was waiting in the pickup line, her heart rate gradually returning to normal as the adrenaline began to subside. Through the car windows, she could see other students and parents going about their normal Friday afternoon routines, completely unaware of the confrontation that had just reshaped the social dynamics of Riverside Academy. "How was your day?" Elena asked, as Sophia settled into the passenger seat. "Eventful," Sophia replied, then proceeded to give her mother a detailed account of what had transpired. Elena listened without interruption, her expression revealing nothing until Sophia finished her report. "Casualties?" she asked finally. "Bruised ribs for Jake, minor shoulder strain for Connor, major damage to Marcus's ego, nothing permanent. Police involvement likely? Doubtful. Too many witnesses to the weeks of harassment leading up to this, and they initiated physical contact. Security cameras probably caught the whole thing." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "Assessment of long-term consequences?" Sophia considered the question carefully. "Unknown. This either ends the harassment permanently or escalates it to a new level. Either way, I don't think I'll be invisible anymore." "Regrets?" "None," Sophia said immediately, then reconsidered. "Actually, one. I regret waiting so long to stand up for myself." Elena reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. "Welcome to the rest of your life, Sophia. It's going to be very different from what came before." As they drove home through the suburban streets, Sophia reflected on her mother's words. She had indeed crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, had revealed abilities that couldn't be hidden, had made a statement that couldn't be taken back. But for the first time since arriving at Riverside Academy, she wasn't looking over her shoulder or planning escape routes or trying to make herself invisible. For the first time in years, she was simply looking forward to what came next. By Monday morning, the story of what happened in the North Corridor had evolved into something approaching legend. Sophia arrived at school to find that her efficient dismantling of Marcus Romano's crew had been transformed through the reliable distortion of teenage gossip into an increasingly dramatic narrative. According to some versions, she had knocked all three boys unconscious with a series of martial arts moves. Others claimed she had used some kind of weapon or that she was a secret black belt who had been hiding her abilities. The most creative storytellers were suggesting that she was part of a witness protection program, or that her family had connections to organized crime. What remained consistent across all versions was that Marcus, Jake, and Connor, who had ruled Riverside Academy through intimidation for the better part of 2 years, had been decisively defeated by the quiet new girl who kept to herself and seemed completely unremarkable. Sophia's first indication of how dramatically things had changed came when she approached her locker and found a small crowd of students gathered nearby, their conversations stopping abruptly when they noticed her arrival. Some looked at her with newfound respect, others with curiosity, and a few with what appeared to be genuine fear. "Excuse me," she said politely, trying to navigate through the group to reach her locker. The students parted immediately, creating a clear path that felt almost ceremonial. Several offered quiet greetings that hadn't been part of her experience during the previous 3 weeks. "Morning, Sophia." "Hey, how's it going?" "Nice weekend?" She responded with polite acknowledgements, while internally marveling at the transformation. The same students who had previously looked through her as if she didn't exist were now hyper-aware of her presence. Zoe Martinez appeared at her elbow as Sophia gathered her books for first period. "So," Zoe said with barely contained excitement, "I heard things got interesting Friday afternoon." "That depends on your definition of interesting. My definition includes Marcus Romano limping home with his tail between his legs and Jake Sullivan telling people he slipped on a wet floor." Sophia paused in her book selection. "Jake is claiming he slipped?" "That's the official story from their camp. All three of them are saying that what people heard was just an accident, that you weren't even involved, that the rumors are completely overblown. This development was unexpected, but strategically sound. By denying that the confrontation had been a defeat, Marcus and his friends were attempting to minimize the damage to their reputations while avoiding the need for retaliation. And people believe that? Zoe grinned. Nobody believes it for a second, but it gives them a way to save face, and it gives you a way to avoid official consequences. The administration can pretend nothing happened, and everyone gets to move on. Except that everyone knows what really happened. Exactly. Which means you've accomplished something that nobody thought was possible. Sophia considered this as they walked toward first period English. What's that? You've changed the balance of power without destroying it completely. Marcus and his friends still have their social positions, but everyone knows they're not untouchable anymore. It's like you've made them mortal. The analysis was perceptive, and Sophia realized that the outcome might actually be better than she had hoped. Rather than creating new enemies who would seek revenge, she had apparently forced a strategic retreat that allowed everyone to maintain some dignity. Her first period English class provided another indication of how dramatically her social status had shifted. When she entered the classroom, several students who had never acknowledged her existence suddenly seemed eager to make conversation. "Sophia, right?" said a girl named Ashley who sat 2 seats over. "I keep meaning to ask, where did you transfer from?" Toronto," Sophia replied, settling into her usual seat. "Canada, that's so cool. Do you miss it?" "Parts of it," Sophia said diplomatically. "I bet the schools are really different there," offered another student, clearly fishing for information about her background. Mr. Richardson called the class to order before the conversation could continue, but Sophia noticed that the attention didn't fade. Throughout the lesson on symbolism in Harper Lee's novel, she caught students glancing at her with obvious curiosity. The pattern continued through her morning classes. Students who had previously treated her as invisible were now going out of their way to include her in conversations, invite her to sit with them, or simply acknowledge her presence in ways that felt both welcome and slightly overwhelming. By lunchtime, Sophia found herself facing a social dilemma she hadn't experienced since elementary school: multiple invitations to sit with different groups. Zoe's table, which had been her primary social connection, was joined by offers from the academic achievers, the student government crowd, and even some of the athletes who had previously been firmly in Marcus's sphere of influence. She chose to stay with Zoe and the girls who had supported her during the previous weeks, but the simple fact that she had options felt remarkable. "This is what happens when people realize you're not afraid," Zoe explained as they ate. "Half the school has been waiting for someone to stand up to Marcus and prove it could be done. And the other half is probably wondering what else you're capable of." This observation proved prophetic during her 6th period study hall. Sophia had returned to her usual seat in the back corner, hoping to catch up on homework, when she was approached by a girl she recognized but had never spoken to. "Sophia Chen?" the girl asked tentatively. Sophia looked up from her chemistry textbook. "Yes? I'm Emma Rodriguez. I was wondering if I could talk to you about something." The name was familiar. Emma had been one of Marcus's previous targets, according to Zoe's earlier briefing. She was a sophomore with dark hair and nervous eyes who seemed to carry herself with the careful posture of someone who had learned to avoid attention. "Of course," Sophia said, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. Emma sat down carefully, glancing around to make sure they weren't being overheard. "I heard about what happened on Friday." A lot of people seem to have heard different versions of what happened on Friday. "I heard the true version," Emma said quietly, "from someone who was there." Sophia waited, curious about where this conversation was heading. "I just wanted to say thank you," Emma continued. "What you did, it mattered. Not just for you, but for everyone they've targeted. I didn't do it for anyone but myself. I know, but it still mattered." Emma's voice grew stronger. "For months, I thought there was something wrong with me. Like maybe I deserved what was happening, or maybe I was too weak to handle normal high school social dynamics." Sophia felt a familiar ache of recognition. "There's nothing wrong with you, Emma. What they did wasn't normal high school anything. I know that now. Seeing someone fight back, seeing that it was possible to win, it changes everything." "What do you mean?" Emma smiled, and for the first time since sitting down, she looked genuinely happy. "I mean, I'm not afraid of them anymore. I mean, I'm not spending my lunch periods hiding in the bathroom. I mean, I joined the debate team this morning because I wanted to, not because I was trying to find a safe place to be invisible." The impact of her actions was becoming clearer to Sophia. By refusing to be a victim, she had inadvertently given permission to others to do the same. "That's great, Emma. The debate team is lucky to have you." "They might not think so when I argue my first case," Emma laughed, "but I guess I'll find out." After Emma left, Sophia found herself thinking about the broader implications of what had happened. She had acted purely in self-defense, with no intention of becoming a symbol or catalyst for change. But her refusal to accept victimization had apparently resonated far beyond her own situation. The thought was both empowering and somewhat daunting. She had wanted to get through high school without drama, but it seemed she had instead become the center of a social transformation that she hadn't anticipated or asked for. Her contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of another unexpected visitor. Marcus Romano stood beside her table, but his demeanor was completely different from their previous encounters. Gone was the casual arrogance and predatory confidence. Instead, he seemed uncertain, almost vulnerable. "Can I sit down?" he asked. Sophia gestured to the empty chair, curious about what had prompted this approach. Marcus sat carefully, his movements suggesting someone who was genuinely unsure of his reception. "I wanted to talk to you about Friday." "What about it?" "I wanted to apologize." The words seemed to cost him significant effort. "What we did was wrong. What I've been doing for a long time was wrong." Sophia studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or strategic calculation. What she saw instead was something that looked like genuine remorse. "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "Because my girlfriend broke up with me over the weekend." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Don't be. She was right too." Marcus looked up, meeting Sophia's eyes for the first time. "She told me that she couldn't date someone who made other people afraid just to feel powerful. She said I'd become someone she didn't recognize and didn't respect." Sophia waited for him to continue. "I've been thinking about that. About who I used to be before I decided that being feared was better than being liked. About whether it's possible to go back to being that person." "What do you think?" "I think it's worth trying." Marcus hesitated, then added, "I was wondering if you might help me figure out how." The request was so unexpected that Sophia wasn't sure she had heard correctly. "You want my help?" "I know how it sounds, but you're the only person who's ever stood up to me successfully. You're the only one who's made me understand that what I was doing was actually weakness disguised as strength." Sophia considered the proposition carefully. Everything she knew about Marcus suggested that this conversation was either a manipulation tactic or a temporary crisis of confidence that would fade once his ego recovered. But something in his expression reminded her of her own moments of self-reflection, the times when she had been forced to confront uncomfortable truths about her own behavior and choices. "What kind of help are you talking about?" she asked finally. I don't know exactly. Maybe just being someone who won't let me fall back into old patterns. Someone who'll call me out if I start reverting to the person I was. That's not really my responsibility, Marcus. I know, but I'm asking anyway. Sophia was quiet for several minutes, weighing the potential benefits against the obvious risks. Helping Marcus reform could genuinely improve the school environment for everyone. But it could also put her in the position of being responsible for his choices and accountable for his failures. "I'll make you a deal," she said finally. "I'll help you figure out how to be better, but only if you're willing to make some genuine changes starting immediately." "What kind of changes?" "Apologize to everyone you've bullied. Not just the recent targets, but everyone going back to when this behavior started. Make it public, make it genuine, and make it clear that you take full responsibility for your actions." Marcus winced. "That's going to be a long list." "That's the point. If you're serious about changing, you need to understand the full scope of the damage you've caused. And after that we'll see if you're actually committed to being different, or if this is just a temporary reaction to consequences." Marcus nodded slowly. "Fair enough. When do I start?" "Right now would be good." To Sophia's surprise, Marcus immediately stood and walked to the front of the study hall classroom. "Excuse me, Mr. Peterson. Could I have everyone's attention for a moment?" The elderly teacher looked up from his papers, blinking in confusion. "Is this an emergency, Mr. Romano?" "Kind of," Marcus replied, then turned to address the room full of students who were now staring at him with various degrees of curiosity and concern. "I want to apologize to everyone in this room," Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. "For the past 2 years, I've used intimidation and harassment to make myself feel powerful, and I've made a lot of people afraid or uncomfortable in the process." Murmurs rippled through the classroom as students exchanged glances of disbelief. "I'm particularly sorry to Emma Rodriguez, David Kim, Tommy Chen, and Sarah Kim, who I know are in this room and who I know I hurt badly enough that it affected their academic performance and emotional well-being." Sophia watched Emma's face transform from shock to something approaching amazement. "I'm also sorry to everyone who felt like they had to modify their behavior or avoid certain parts of the school because of my actions. That was wrong, and I take full responsibility for it." Marcus paused, seeming to gather his courage for the most difficult part. "I've built my reputation on making other people smaller so I could feel bigger, and I'm ashamed of that. I'm going to work on being someone who lifts people up instead of tearing them down, and I hope that over time I can earn back the respect I've lost." The classroom was completely silent for several seconds after Marcus finished speaking. Then, slowly, a few students began to applaud. The applause spread until most of the room was clapping, not enthusiastically, but with what seemed like genuine appreciation for the gesture. Marcus returned to Sophia's table, his face flushed, but his expression determined. "How was that?" he asked. "It was a good start," Sophia replied honestly. "But you know that was the easy part, right?" "What do you mean?" "I mean that apologizing is simple compared to actually changing your behavior consistently over time. The real test will be whether you can maintain this attitude when you're frustrated or angry, or when your friends pressure you to go back to your old ways." Marcus nodded. "I know, but I have to try." Over the following weeks, Sophia watched with fascination as the social dynamics of Riverside Academy underwent a gradual but significant transformation. Marcus's public apology had created a ripple effect that extended far beyond his immediate circle of influence. Jake Sullivan, apparently inspired by his friend's example, made his own attempts at reconciliation with people he had intimidated. His efforts were less eloquent than Marcus's, but seemed equally sincere, particularly his conversation with Emma Rodriguez, where he admitted that his behavior had been motivated by his own insecurities about his athletic performance. Connor Blake proved more resistant to change, but even he seemed to understand that the old system of social dominance was no longer sustainable. He stopped actively bullying people, though he maintained his distance from both his former allies and their previous targets. The most significant change, however, was in the behavior of the student body as a whole. The demonstration that Marcus's group could be successfully challenged had emboldened other students to stand up for themselves and others in ways that created a more positive school environment overall. Sophia found herself in the unexpected position of being both a catalyst for these changes and somewhat removed from them. Students treated her with a respect that bordered on deference, but they also seemed slightly intimidated by her abilities and her reputation for directness. "You've become a legend," Zoe observed one day as they walked between classes. "People are calling you the girl who changed Riverside Academy." "That's ridiculous," Sophia replied. "I just refused to be bullied. Everyone else changed themselves." "Maybe, but you showed them it was possible." As the semester progressed toward winter break, Sophia reflected on how different her experience had been from what she had expected. She had anticipated 2 years of maintaining low visibility and avoiding conflict. Instead, she had become one of the most well-known students in the school and had inadvertently triggered a social revolution. The irony wasn't lost on her that by fighting to remain herself, she had inspired others to do the same. By refusing to be made smaller, she had created space for everyone else to grow larger. On the last day before winter break, Sophia found a small wrapped package in her locker with a note attached. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the message was clear. "Thank you for showing us that we don't have to be afraid. Thank you for proving that one person can make a difference. Thank you for being brave enough to be yourself." The students of Riverside Academy. Inside the package was a small silver pendant in the shape of a phoenix, along with a card signed by more than 50 students whose names she recognized from across all social groups and grade levels. Sophia smiled as she fastened the pendant around her neck. She'd come to Riverside Academy hoping to be invisible, to get through high school without making waves or drawing attention to herself. Instead, she had discovered that sometimes the most important thing a person can do is refuse to disappear, refuse to be silent, and refuse to accept treatment that diminishes their humanity. As she walked out of Riverside Academy for winter break, Sophia realized that her mother had been right about this place being different. Not because the bullies were less determined or the social structures were more fair, but because she had finally decided to stop hiding who she was. The quiet storm had indeed changed everything, not just for her, but for everyone around her. And for the first time since her family had started their nomadic life, Sophia was genuinely excited about returning to school after the break. She was no longer the new girl trying to blend in. She was simply Sophia Chen, and that was enough. Spring had transformed Riverside Academy from the grey institutional building Sophia had first encountered into something that actually felt welcoming. Flowering trees lined the walkways, students gathered in small groups on the lawn during lunch breaks, and the overall atmosphere carried an energy that hadn't been present during those tense fall months. Sophia sat in the school's outdoor courtyard, reviewing notes for her advanced biology final exam, while half listening to the conversations flowing around her. The student body had settled into new patterns over the intervening months, patterns that felt healthier and more inclusive than what had existed before. "Hey, Sophia," called Emma Rodriguez as she approached with her debate team trophy. Emma had not only joined the team, but had become one of their strongest members, her natural intelligence finally finding an outlet that didn't require hiding. Did you hear about college acceptances? Sophia looked up from her notes. Some of them. How did you do? Early admission to Northwestern, Emma said with a grin that could have powered the entire school. Full academic scholarship. That's incredible, Emma. Congratulations. I never would have had the confidence to apply for scholarships if... Emma paused, seeming to reconsider her words. Well, if things hadn't changed around here. Sophia understood the sentiment without needing it spelled out. The environment at Riverside Academy had undergone a gradual but significant transformation since that October afternoon in the North Corridor. Students who had previously felt the need to hide their intelligence, their interests, or their authentic selves had begun to emerge and flourish. The changes hadn't been dramatic or sudden. There had been no official announcements or policy changes. Instead, the shift had been organic, growing from the simple demonstration that the social hierarchies that had seemed permanent were actually quite fragile when challenged. "What about you?" Emma asked. "Any word from colleges?" "MIT early admission," Sophia replied with a small smile. "Full scholarship, plus a research position if I want it." "MIT, Sophia, that's amazing." Emma's enthusiasm was genuine and infectious. "What kind of research?" "Cybersecurity and artificial intelligence, following in my mum's footsteps, sort of." They were joined by Zoe Martinez, who had spent the spring semester as student body president after running on a platform of inclusivity and anti-bullying initiatives. "Are we talking about college plans?" Zoe asked, settling onto the bench beside them. "Emma got into Northwestern and Sophia got into MIT, Emma announced, both with full scholarships." "That's incredible. I'm so proud of both of you." Zoe's expression grew thoughtful. "You know, it's amazing how much this place has changed since the beginning of the year." Sophia nodded, thinking about the various ways Riverside Academy had evolved. The most obvious change was in the behavior of students who had previously been bullies or targets. But the deeper transformation was in the overall culture, the sense that students had agency, that they could shape their environment rather than simply endure it. "Has anyone seen Marcus lately?" Emma asked. "I heard he got into several good schools too." "State University with a partial scholarship," Zoe confirmed. "He's been working with the guidance counselor to set up a peer mediation program for next year. Apparently he wants to study conflict resolution in college." Sophia wasn't entirely surprised by this development. Marcus's transformation had been perhaps the most dramatic of all the changes she had witnessed. After his public apology in study hall, he had indeed followed through on his commitment to change. Though the process hadn't been simple or linear, there had been setbacks, moments when his old patterns of thinking and behavior had reasserted themselves under stress. But he had also shown genuine dedication to becoming someone different, someone who used his natural leadership abilities to build rather than tear down. "He actually asked me to co-author an article for the school newspaper about restorative justice," Emma continued, "about how people can change and make amends for harmful behavior." "Are you going to do it?" Sophia asked. "I think so. It feels like it might help other students who are dealing with similar situations." As if summoned by their conversation, Marcus Romano appeared at the edge of their group, carrying a backpack and wearing the slightly uncertain expression that had replaced his former arrogance. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, the question carrying none of the presumption that had characterized his previous interactions. "Of course," Zoe said, making room on the bench. Marcus settled beside them, pulling out a thick folder of papers. "I'm working on the presentation for the school board meeting next week, the peer mediation program proposal." "How's it going?" Sophia asked. "Complicated. I'm trying to figure out how to explain why someone with my disciplinary record should be trusted to help resolve conflicts between other students." It was a valid concern. Marcus's journey toward becoming someone different had required acknowledging the full extent of the harm he had caused, which made his current position as an advocate for positive change somewhat paradoxical. Maybe that's exactly why you should be trusted, Emma suggested. You understand both sides of the dynamic, what motivates bullying behavior and what it feels like to be responsible for hurting people. Marcus considered this. You think my past mistakes could actually be an asset? I think your commitment to learning from those mistakes is an asset, Sophia said carefully. The question is whether you can convince the school board that you've genuinely changed rather than just temporarily modified your behavior. Fair point. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Can I ask you something, Sophia? Sure. Do you think people can really change, not just their behavior, but who they are fundamentally? It was a question that Sophia had been considering throughout the months since their confrontation. Her answer would have been different in October than it was now, after watching Marcus struggle to rebuild his relationships and his reputation through consistent effort over time. I think people can choose to change, she said finally. But I also think it requires more than just wanting to be different. It requires understanding why you were the way you were, accepting responsibility for the consequences, and making a sustained commitment to new patterns even when it's difficult. And you think I've done that? Sophia studied Marcus's face, noting the genuine uncertainty in his expression. The cocky teenager who had tried to intimidate her in the study hall had been replaced by someone who seemed genuinely committed to growth and accountability. I think you're doing it, she replied. The jury's still out on whether you'll continue doing it when you're in college and don't have the same support system and external accountability. Marcus nodded. That's honest. I appreciate that. Jake Sullivan joined their group a few minutes later, carrying his own stack of college acceptance letters and wearing a smile that seemed more relaxed than any expression Sophia had ever seen from him. Good news or bad news? Zoe asked, noting his upbeat demeanor. Good news. I got into the State University's education program. I'm going to study to become a physical education teacher. That's great, Jake, Emma said with genuine enthusiasm. You'll be good at that. I hope so. I figure if I'm going to work with kids anyway, I might as well do it in a way that helps them feel confident about themselves rather than... He trailed off, but the implication was clear. Jake's transformation had been different from Marcus's, but equally significant. Where Marcus had needed to rebuild his entire approach to social relationships, Jake had needed to understand that his size and strength could be used to protect and encourage rather than intimidate. Have you thought about coaching? Sophia asked. Actually, yeah. The university has a program where education majors can get certified to coach multiple sports. I think I'd like to work with younger kids, maybe middle school age. That's perfect, Zoe said. Middle school is when a lot of kids either develop confidence in athletics or get turned off from sports entirely based on their experiences with coaches. As their group continued to discuss college plans and future goals, Sophia reflected on how surreal the conversation would have seemed 8 months earlier. The idea that she would be sitting peacefully with Marcus Romano and Jake Sullivan, discussing their shared commitment to positive change and mutual support, would have been completely unimaginable. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the situation was how natural it felt. These weren't former enemies who had declared a truce. They were people who had learned to see each other as complex individuals rather than simple categories of friend or threat. The final bell rang, signaling the end of another school day, and students began gathering their belongings and preparing to leave. As Sophia packed her notes and books, she realized that this had become her favorite time of day. The informal conversations with people she genuinely liked and respected, the sense of belonging that had nothing to do with fear or hierarchy. Sophia, Marcus said as they prepared to part ways, I never properly thanked you. For what? For not backing down, for showing me that there was a different way to handle conflict, for giving me the chance to become someone better." Sophia considered his words carefully. "I didn't do any of those things for you, Marcus. I did them for me. I know, but they helped me anyway." Marcus smiled, and for the first time since she had met him, the expression seemed completely genuine. "So, thank you." As Sophia walked toward the parking lot where her mother waited, she thought about the unexpected paths that had led to this moment. She had come to Riverside Academy hoping to be invisible, to avoid conflict, to get through high school without making waves. Instead, she had learned that sometimes the most important thing a person can do is refuse to be diminished, refuse to accept treatment that violates their dignity, and refuse to let others define who they are or what they're worth. The confrontation in the North Corridor had lasted less than 30 seconds, but its effects had rippled outward in ways that had transformed not just her own experience, but the experiences of countless other students. By standing up for herself, she had inadvertently given permission for everyone else to do the same. "How was your day?" Elena asked, as Sophia settled into the passenger seat. "Good," Sophia replied, then considered the question more carefully. Actually, it was better than good. It was normal, in the best possible way. Elena smiled as she pulled out of the parking lot. "Normal is underrated. I'm starting to think so too." As they drove home through the familiar streets of their neighborhood, Sophia realized that for the first time in her academic career, she was looking forward to returning to the same school in the fall. Not because it would be easy or conflict-free, but because it would be a place where she could continue to be herself without apology or compromise. The quiet storm had indeed changed everything, but perhaps the most important change was the simplest. Sophia Chen no longer felt the need to hide who she was or apologize for taking up space in the world. And that, she thought, was worth every moment of uncertainty and conflict that had led to this point. The girl who had once tried to be invisible had learned that there was tremendous power in being seen, tremendous strength in being authentic, and tremendous value in refusing to let others determine her worth. It had taken her 16 years to understand that lesson, but she suspected it would serve her well for the rest of her life.